Hello YouTube. In this video I'm going to be showing you how I converted this $22 PC I got on eBay into a gaming PC using the power of Linux. I'll specifically be using Cachyos, and there will be timestamps for each portion of the video down in the description below. The specs on the machine is that it has a FX 8350, which I thought it was an 8-core, but as I did some more research, apparently AMD lost some sort of lawsuit with how they marketed this. Apparently the 8 cores behave more like hyper-threading, so it's more like 4 cores with 8 threads. Also had 8 gigabytes of DDR3 clocked at 1333. Technically with tax it was 23. The person I bought this from originally wanted 35 for it and wanted 40 for shipping. I negotiated him down on the price to 22, and I asked him if he would do local pickup when I found out he lived in my area. And as you might expect, when you're buying something this cheap, you tend to probably run into some problems, and yeah, I did. So for example, in the description, it never mentioned anything about when you turn it on, it starts smoking. And yeah, I'm not joking, there was smoke coming out of the power supply. I learned a valuable lesson not to test a untested PC in my bedroom. It smelled like burning metal and plastic, and I actually thought I lost the PC. And this was the first of many problems I ran into. Obviously, if you get something like this, you should turn it off immediately. First thing I did was I unplugged the system and tried to discharge the power supply as much as possible by holding the power button. Power supplies in this state can be really dangerous. They're not something to play around with. After that, what I did next was I pulled out the motherboard and I grabbed one of my spare power supplies that I had lying around. I used a screwdriver to jump the 2 pins for the power button. And thankfully it wasn't actually damaged by the power supply. I also did notice that the RAM sticks were in the wrong configuration. I moved them into the proper configuration and added 2 more sticks to get 16. Bit of a spoiler, but I ended up not even really needing 16 gigabytes for most games. Most games stayed under 8 gigabytes, so I could have actually gotten away with just the 8. Linux's RAM utilization is very low for system memory. I was also hoping to overclock, and I had a water cooler lying around. I also had a Vega 56 I wanted to try with it. I moved everything over to a better case. Now for the overclocking, and boy was this a disappointment. I immediately first tried to get it up to 4.5. That didn't work. The next thing I tried was 4.1. That didn't work either. And then I noticed something very weird for the core voltage because I was trying to figure out what the problem was. And then when I saw what the core voltage was, I couldn't get it under what it's showing right here. 1.42 is the lowest it will go. Despite it not being able to overclock to 4.1 gigahertz, the weird thing is when I had the turbo on, it actually overclocked to that amount on its own. I went into Windows to try the Cinebench test because I wanted to kind of see what was going on. And the temps were surprisingly really good. It stayed well with under 54C. And that was pretty good, so I was kind of confused on why it wouldn't do any type of overclock. My theory here is that since the motherboard has been pumping that much voltage into the CPU, it can't do any type of stable overclock now. Really wasn't what I was expecting from a gigabyte ultra durable board. I did happen to have another one of these motherboards lying around with a different CPU in it, but it also had extremely high voltage for that one as well. So I'm guessing this is a gigabyte feature, not a bug. I did learn another valuable lesson to at least try it on the stock cooler to get an overclock before changing it to a different type of cooler. Next thing I did was I went to Cachyos' website and downloaded a fresh ISO. And then I downloaded Rufus, plugged in a flash drive, and put it on the flash drive. Then I installed it on my SSD. Alright, now let's test some games. First up is GTA 5 Enhanced Edition. At 1080p with the very high preset, the average FPS was 69 with a 1% low of 40. This game ran really smooth. I'm not quite sure about the online portion. This was done in the story mode. I think the online is disabled on Linux. I'm not sure though. The first Berserker at 1080p on the max preset got on average 61 FPS with a 1% low of 47. The first Descendant at 1080p on the low preset got on average 76 FPS with a 1% low of 52. This game ran a lot better than I expected it would considering it's an Unreal Engine 5 game. Warframe at 1080p on the medium preset got on average 88 FPS with a 1% low of 55. This was in the open world area and I did notice it did have some issues on high, that's why I had to bump it down to medium. But as soon as I bumped it down to medium, it ran really smooth. Up next is Paladins. It's kind of similar to Overwatch and Marvel Rivals, except it's extremely optimized and it only takes 30 gigabytes to install. At 1080p at the max preset, it got on average 132 FPS with a 1% low of 86. Stellar Blade at native TAA at 1080p on the high preset got on average 50 FPS with a 1% low of 34. One thing I noticed in Stellar Blade is that the GPU utilization was hovering between 70 and 90, so it wasn't getting full utilization, so the CPU was bottlenecking Vega 56. Tainted Grail at native TAA at 1080p on the high preset got on average 52 FPS with a 1% low of 37. Next up, the Cyberpunk benchmark. At 1080p on the ultra preset with FSR on quality, it got 55 FPS for the average with a minimum of 36. When I went in game for Cyberpunk 2077, with no upscaling, no frame gen, at 1080p on the medium preset, I got on average 49 FPS with a 1% low of 26. One important thing I want to mention here is it's going to greatly depend on where you are in the game on what your FPS will be. Marvel Rivals at Epic TSR Ultra Performance at 1080p on the low preset got on average 71 FPS with a 1% low of 34. And this can definitely vary depending on what map you're on. I did run into a weird problem with Cachyos. This was a ongoing theme where certain things would not load like games, and for example even the Marvel Rivals benchmark itself would not load in Cachyos. So I decided to try Linux Mint to see how that would be able to work, if it would work fine on there for the Marvel Rivals benchmark, and it actually did load. and run. The average FPS inside the benchmark was 45 with a 1% low of 25. Where the Winds Meet was probably one of the more interesting games that I went through. I noticed and encountered a lot of bugs, and I thought this weird horse bug was funny, so I thought I would add it in. I did notice for around the first 5 to 10 minutes some stuttering in between. Also, like character animations not actually showing. But after around that 10-minute area, it pretty much all went away. At 1080p on the performance preset, on average, I got 40 FPS with a 1% low of 21. Even though 40 FPS was the average, it was actually very playable. I was able to beat a boss that recommended me to be level 30, and I was only level 7 before I killed it, turning level 8. Shadow of the Tomb Raider in-game benchmark got on average 58 FPS with a minimum of 15. The Black Myth Wukong in-game benchmark at 1080p on medium preset with super resolution set to 40 got an average of 58 with a minimum of 35. These last 4 games I could not get to work on Cachyos, so I had to switch to Linux Mint to give it a shot, and they all worked fine on Mint. It kept going through like a weird loading screen. The 4 games I couldn't get to load was Expedition 33, Oblivion Remastered, Predecessor, and Splitgate Arena Reloaded. Expedition 33 at TSR medium at 1080p on the low preset got on average 42 FPS with a 1% low of 22. Splitgate Arena Remastered at 1080p on the Ultra preset got on average 86 with a 1% low of 35. Predecessor at 1080p on the medium preset got on average 69 FPS with a 1% low of 30. Oblivion Remastered, this game can be a stuttery mess even on higher end hardware. But at native FSR at 1080p on the medium preset, on average, got 31 FPS with a 1% low of 11. Conclusions. Now, if you're looking to get a deal like this, is it worth it? Well, I did have to run through a lot of hoops, as you can probably have seen, with well, obviously the power supply almost catching my place on fire, the fact that I could not overclock the system basically at all, and Cachyos being kind of weird, it was still a pretty good deal regardless of those facts. I would say if you're looking for a good deal, the best place I would start is asking friends or family, because you might be surprised on what kind of computer they have like lying around. You could probably easily get a workstation and just convert it into a gaming PC. I've done a video on the past on how to do that. I actually just got done converting a 15-year-old workstation into a gaming PC for one of my friends, and I just uploaded that as my last video. Might be something to look at if you're wanting to do something like this as well. Also, secondhand thrift shops, or even sometimes you might be able to find something at a pawn shop. And if that doesn't work, the Facebook Marketplace is pretty good as well outside of eBay. The reason why I recommend those ones over eBay is you can usually avoid the shipping charge, and eBay does charge, I think, like a 15%. That's actually one reason why a lot of the listings on eBay are so high is because of all of those factors. And usually if you are going to find a good deal on eBay, it's going to be a one-off thing. It's not going to be the same seller. Usually it's someone that just wants to get rid of something that's been in their closet. I am planning on making like a guide on how to find stuff, but that's going to take some time, especially with how volatile the market's gotten lately with prices just spiking on everything. The 8350 that good in 2026? Well, I think it wasn't too bad considering there's probably better options out there, and it was actually bottlenecking the Vega 56. So if you were to get something like this, I'd probably look at maybe a RX 480 or 580. Probably be a better balance for it. And actually, I don't even think I needed to upgrade to 16 gigabytes because it was actually running pretty well, and it wasn't exceeding 8 gigabytes for most games, except I think the only one that off the top of my head that I recall that went over it was Where the Winds Meet. Cachyos definitely did put in some work, but unfortunately it couldn't play all the games, and I don't know what was going on there. I do really think there are better options than the FX 8350, but it might not be a bad pickup if you find it pretty cheap like I did. Especially with RAM prices right now, it might not be a bad pickup because of it being DDR3. I'd really say it just depends on what kind of games you want to play. If any of the ones in the list that I showed meet your expectations or you would be fine with, then yeah, definitely probably not bad. Really sucked that I couldn't get even a overclock out of it, but that might be a much better real world scenario because a chip this old might not even get an overclock on average, kind of like mine did. If you liked what you saw, give it a thumbs up. If you disliked it, give it a thumbs down. If you'd like to see more videos like this, consider subscribing. Thank you and have a great day.